How's it going, guys? Topic for today's video, why I'm building a tiny house. Alright, so I posted my first video about tiny houses on this channel about two and a half years ago. That was when I just finished like a whole bunch of traveling and I was kind of settled down, and I really loved traveling, and I did a lot of it by bicycle, so a lot of cycle touring. I was just at the point in my life where I was just like, I don't really want to go out and do that anymore. I really wanted to like set up a place that I could like call home, right? And getting a mortgage or, you know, renting out a place, I don't know. It just wasn't what I wanted. I wanted something that I could call my own, something that I owned myself. And so when I first discovered the tiny house movement, I was just like, bingo, this is what I want to do. And fast forward 2 years, and now I'm standing in a tiny house that I built with Hannah. And this is pretty awesome. So I wanted to go over the reasons why we're building a tiny house as opposed to going with a standard house that you could just buy on the market or anything like that. Why are we building our own tiny house? So one of the main reasons why we're building a tiny house and why a lot of people get into tiny houses is because of the overall cost of them. This house that we're standing in, I've just put in about over $20,000 into it. And by the time that it's done with all the finishing, it'll be in the neighborhood of $28,000 to $30,000. So for a lot of people that might seem like a lot of cash, but when you compare the amount of cash that you put into a tiny house like this, so for a standard house that's in decent shape, obviously it's very dependent on where it's gonna be and all that kind of stuff. It can range from anywhere from $100,000 all the way up to $250,000. So the housing market fluctuates so much, and it's so dependent on the area that you're living in. So a lot of people, including ourselves, we've been able to save up enough money in order to pay cash for it so that we're not gonna get sucked into a big mortgage that we're gonna be paying for the next 25 or 30 years. Staying out of debt with the banks is one of our main priorities in our life. So that's one reason why a tiny house was so attractive to us, is that we could pay cash for it and not have to worry about this mortgage that's gonna be like hanging over our heads. So the next reason why we wanted to build a tiny house is because we really don't need a house that is like 1,500 or 1,600 square feet. So the footprint of this house is about 200 square feet of the actual footprint, but if you include the lofts, it'll probably be 260 or 270 square feet of actual living space. Right now we're actually living in an apartment that's 420 square feet, so we only have to downsize a very small amount from our apartment into this tiny house when we're gonna be living in it full time. Not only are we gonna have the inside space, but we're also gonna have a big awning off the main side of the house, and that's going to pretty well almost double the living space because that's gonna be another area outside of the house that we're also gonna be able to live in. The thing is, with our apartment, we don't really have that convenience outside of our front door. We have neighbors all around us, but when we have the tiny house on our piece of property, it's gonna be great because we're not gonna have any neighbors around us. We're gonna be able to plop this right in the middle of it, and we're just gonna feel so much more liberated because we have such a small house. We're probably gonna spend a lot more time outside as opposed to always spending it inside. And going along with deliberate living, what's so nice about it is that you can really focus your life around the things that matter the most to you. That is what minimalism is all about. So instead of having a huge house filled with tons of crap in it that you hardly ever use, everything that's gonna be in our tiny house is gonna have to be stuff that we use on a continual basis. We don't really have a lot of extra storage or space to have like a bunch of crap that we might use or we might never ever use. So one of the main reasons why we are living in a tiny house is because we do have to be much more deliberate and much more minimal with possessions that we do own. So the third reason why that we're building a tiny house is due to the environmental impact, not only of the actual construction process, but the ongoing living experience as well. So to build this tiny house, the amount of materials that are needed for the actual construction of it is only a fraction of what it would be for a standard size house. So right there, we're only consuming about a fraction of the materials that is used to build a standard size house. And then on top of that, for the heating, for the cooling, if you wanna go off the grid with solar, It's gonna be much easier to do that in a tiny house, especially with solar, just because you're gonna need a much smaller system in order to do a tiny house as opposed to doing a very large size house. Now, living in a smaller space, there's obviously some, I would call them sacrifices, that you would have to make. But a lot of those sacrifices, they might seem like a sacrifice, but there's always like a really good solution to kind of get around it. So with some of the sacrifices that you need to make in a tiny house, it's actually quite liberating because we don't have this like huge amount of debt over our heads to pay for this, to pay for a huge house or anything like that. Our ongoing costs to heat it, to cool it, if we're to do solar, then that's gonna cost a lot less. To maintain and clean the house is gonna be significantly easier just because it's so small. But there might be some comforts or some sacrifices that you make, but on the other end of the spectrum, it gives you the opportunity of a lot more freedom. So the fourth reason that we're building a tiny house comes down to the freedom aspect again. So when we first started building this tiny house, we didn't know where we're gonna put it or anything like that. We just knew that we wanted a tiny house, and then over time, we would find a place to put it. And now we have found a place to put it, which is great. But what is so nice about a tiny house on wheels is that you can move it around, and it's not stuck in one spot because it's a standard house, right? You can move it across the country if you wanted to. And for a lot of people to have that type of freedom in their life, like that is tremendous. And a lot of people really kind of gravitate towards that. Now there are some downsides to living in a tiny house, so I don't want to omit those. One of the main reasons being is that since it is a house on wheels, it's not considered a permanent structure. Therefore, it is technically illegal to live in it all year round or to call it your permanent residence because it's not like a permitted structure like a standard house. On the flip side of that, it's really nice because in order to build a house like this on wheels, you don't need to pull any permits or anything like that. You can, since you're building essentially like a big box on a trailer, it's not something that you have to get permitted in a standard way that you'd have to go through all the hoops with a house. So yes, it is technically illegal to live in your tiny house all year round, but the only way that is usually reported is by a neighbor. So wherever your tiny house is parked, say one of your neighbor doesn't like the fact that somebody is living in like one of these tiny houses or something like that, they could report you to the city. They could come out and ask you to move it or fine you or something like that. I don't know if they would fine you right away, but I think it would be more of a, you just gotta like move it because someone has complained about it. But it's not like there's people from like the city or the county going and driving around in cars looking for people that are living full-time in tiny houses. It's a very rare occurrence that anything like that happens. So I don't think that it's something that you really need to like be concerned about, but it is something to keep in mind when you're looking for a place to actually park your tiny house. So those are the main reasons why we're building a tiny house. If you have any other really good reasons why people build a tiny house, leave them in the box below. If you have any questions or comments, also leave them in the comment box below. And I'll catch you guys on the next video. Talk to you soon. Peace.